and welcome to the Deer IQ podcast, where smart hunting begins. I'm Adam Lewis, and we're in part 3 of our series, The Great Leverage of Hunters, Deer Science. What we actually know about deer and how they operate directly translates into our hunting decisions and success, which is why this is super important for us to know as much as possible about. In this episode, we're joined by Dr. Bronson Strickland of the MSU Deer Lab, looking at collared buck studies and what they reveal about specific buck personalities that even surprise the scientists. And you're going to want to write some of this overflowing wealth of wisdom down and reflect on it afterward to get the most out of it. Our free journal is the best way to do that. You can download it below. Okay, so here are the top things to look for during this episode. What is the biggest surprise of all the collared buck studies to Dr. Bronson Strickland? Why do certain bucks disappear, then reappear later at your hunting spot or on your trail cameras? We've all probably had a buck just vanish, and this explains what actually happens. What are the two main personalities of bucks, and how can we figure this out and use it to up our odds and take a particular buck? And there's a ton more high IQ science in there as well, so let's get to the podcast and up your deer IQ. Okay, I'm here with Dr. Bronson Strickland. Dr. Strickland, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Adam. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. A lot of listeners might know you from your own podcast, from other podcasts you've been on. You're fairly popular, it seems. And just a little bit about you, though, because some people might not know who you are. You work with the MSU Deer Lab. And tell us a little bit more, though. I don't want to do this for you, but what should listeners know about you, just to give them an idea who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I can't say anything really about the MSU Deer Lab without also mentioning and giving credit to the co-director, Steve Damaris. And the way we kind of partition activities and so forth is Steve is more or less the lead on our research, and I am more or less the lead on our outreach. So outreach just meaning taking the scientific results and findings and making sure they get out so that the hunting public and the general public, et cetera, can understand it. So I cooperate and help and assist Steve on research. And of course, Steve assists me on the outreach, but that's kind of how we partition things and why we work so well together.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's a really key thing. And what we'll try to do today is taking this, we're looking at deer science, which I call the great leverage, which if hunters can take the actual science, there's a lot of myths out there in hunting world. We can take the actual science and boil that down to simple, digestible things that we can apply. We'll be light years ahead of where we were type thing. So that's what we're going to try to do today. We'll have several segments. So let's get into it here right off the bat. You guys have done some pretty interesting collared buck studies. And from those, learned some things. Some things I think guys would say, oh yeah, that just reinforces what I knew. Some things maybe not. So let's start real general here. In your collared buck studies, what's the most eye-opening thing you've learned that have changed maybe the way you view things, or that maybe deer hunters might view things?
First of all, Adam, I'll agree with you that most of the data, most of the stuff that we learn is old information, meaning that, deer move every day. We see greater activity centered on sun up and sundown. Deer activity increases during the rut, just general things
Right.
we've known for a long time. So all that gets reinforced. I think the information, though, that we get from these GPS collar studies is the frequency and precision of the data. And so it all depends on how you program your collars. But for us, like during hunting season, we're getting locations every 15 minutes. And we're getting that over for a lot of our bucks over 2 deer seasons. So you really get a lot of in deer season information from them. And probably the biggest thing that surprised me the most is the excursions. And so some of the most every buck. And so you think back to hunters, what hunters used to observe, kind of the progression of technology and knowledge derived
Right.
from is we kind of gleaned everything from what we saw in the field. Well, then we added trail cameras, and it opened up a
Mm-hmm.
whole new level of understanding of deer behavior. And then we can put, GPS collars on these deer, and it's another whole new level. And so every time we add another layer of technology, we learn more and more. So in the old days, even with trail cameras, when a buck was off your property or out of the area, you had no idea where it
Yeah,
was.
you're just guessing.
And oftentimes, a lot of people just conclude that it was killed. That buck died. I haven't seen it for a month. And so what we're learning from even bucks that behave normally, so to speak, and are more or less have a normal home range, they're still going to take a couple excursions out of that home range during the rut, after the rut, and so forth. So I kind of call that a weekend vacation. They'll kind of go
Gotcha.
for a day or two or three and come back around. But probably the biggest eye-opening thing was the shifts that some of these bucks will make in their home range prior to or during deer season. And so literally we'll set up a completely new home range a couple miles away or 15 miles away. And so you have camera data on that buck, he's there because you've got thousands of pictures. And then at some
Mm-hmm.
particular point when it leaves the property,
Gone.
he's gone. Um, Another thing that we've learned, and this is something that a lot of people that were really diligent about their trail camera data, was that I would get questions from, why is it that I'll see a particular buck until, I'm just making up a date here,
Mm-hmm.
November 2nd. And then all of a sudden after November 2nd, it's gone. And then the following year, they'll see a very, very similar pattern. There'll be this buck on their property. They'll see it until about November 2nd, and it's gone again. Or it may be that a buck shows up on your property every year about November 15th. I really didn't believe that when people were giving me that feedback. I'm like, he's probably on your property. You're just not getting a photo of it. It's
Right. Where's
there,
your
but it's there
camera
at
at?
night, et cetera, et cetera. But these GPS collars prove that. That is precisely what is going on for about 25, 30% of these bucks.
Interesting. So there's a lot in what you just said. I'm going to back up a second, but I think it's important to note you said that like the layers of technology and our understanding have increased, as well as our peeling back the layers of I guess deer's personality and how they really tick, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I want guys to think about this, like even with trail cameras, we think we're getting all this data, which is more than we used to. Like we started just in the field, we're getting data, which usually that isn't that much, because how often are you actually looking at deer when you're hunting? It's a low percentage of the time. And then trail cameras, I'm getting way more data, but again, these are snapshots, moments in time that I'm just getting a little blip of data in certain locations, right?
Right.
And so then video helps with those, but again, they're in one spot. But if you add these collars, these GPS collars, every 15 minutes, what's going on. And it's kind of funny, every hunter's probably wished, like, I wish I could just have a tracker on this thing to figure it out, right?
Right.
And that's what you guys have done over, you said, several seasons with some of these deer. So you talk about these shifts. Let's get into that a little more. Are you talking about and maybe personalities too, like mobile bucks versus sedentary bucks? Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's lots of ways to describe it. We've used a lot of different words over the years, and we just kind of finally arrived at there's the homebody, the sedentary, they don't go out much, kind of buck. And that's probably, about 2/3 of them do kind of what we've always thought. They have a very established and defined home range that they're going to spend all of their time, with the exception of the weekend trip, the excursion, a couple times. Then we have this other category that we're calling a personality, but it's really just a behavior. They just demonstrate a different type of behavior that we call the mobile bucks. Now, within that category of what we're calling mobile bucks, we have some that we're calling bouncers, or they're restless or shiftless or whatever. But essentially, they are setting up two different home ranges over a period of time. So during, let's say, a calendar year, they're going to have two different home ranges. And the bouncer category means they're going back and forth like a pinball. They're bouncing back and forth. Spend a week or two or spend a month, then go to the other one. Then the other one that we're calling a shift or a shifter. And their home range is simply, if you plotted the points, it looks like a dumbbell. And so you have a big cluster of points during one time of the year and a big cluster of points the other time of the year. And there'll just be a little corridor that connects both of those. And they are not bouncing back and forth. It's just they're spending about half their year in one, or half their year or a third of a year in another. And that's something that was really enlightening to us. And I can't say, Adam, that occurs in your neck of the woods. I think it probably does to some extent, but it's just something we haven't seen reported that often. A lot of people have reported excursions, doing, again, the little weekend trips, but not nearly as much of such a significant proportion of the population of bucks demonstrating this mobile movement behavior.
Interesting. So just to try to clarify a few things. So you're saying if we categorize bucks, and first of all, these studies were done was that in Mississippi? Where these?
They were, yes.
Okay. So we can assume maybe that it's the same for deer everywhere, but we can't specifically say that, right?
Right.
But you can probably assume that.
It's a pretty safe
It's
assumption.
me saying that. Yeah. So if that's true, you're saying first excursions are for all deer. So all deer will take excursions like these weekend trips. But then
including does.
Including does. Interesting. But then there's two general categories, the mobile bucks you called, and sedentary, right?
Right.
So of the mobile, within that, there's two you mentioned, the bouncers and the shifters.
Yeah.
So the bouncers have two home ranges. They bounce back and forth. The shifter is half here and half there, pretty much half the time, right?
Right. More or less, yeah.
So do you know, before we get, so sedentary was just got bucks or deer that are just pretty much in one spot most of the time.
Right.
Do you know why? Have you dug into the whys of these? Like, is it hunting pressure? Is it food sources? What's causing this?
Well, we've tried our best to systematically go through at least every reason that we could come up with in our finite knowledge. And we, thinking about, is there a difference in predation risk? Is there a difference in food? Would there be a difference in breeding opportunities? And we just keep, I can't say we eliminate that as a possibility, but we just don't think there's sufficient logic and explanation for any of those. And mainly it's because everywhere that we see these bucks move to, bouncing or shifting to a different location, we don't see any difference at all in like habitat, diversity, or quality. I think it would be unreasonable in the Southeast to think that the coyote density was higher in point A than it was in point B. It's unreasonable to assume that hunting pressure at the scale of 5,000 to 10,000 acres was that much different in point A and point B. So what we kind of have settled on, but at least at this point in time with the technology that we have, there's just the only thing we can conclude is that there just appears to be genetically deep within the genome of a deer, a certain proportion of them have a personality that is a colonizer or an explorer. And there's a lot of human bias when I say this, but I think it's something that we can have an analogy to, is that within human beings, there are people that are very safe and stay at home.
Right.
Even a long vacation, there's some anxiety with being out of your comfort zone. It's kind of risky being on the highway, on and
Right,
on.
yeah.
And then there's some people that you could say, hey, take a month and just go explore something, with no plan, no money, here's a car, here's a tank of gas, go. And they would do it. That's their lifestyle. They find it fascinating, intriguing. They know deep down inside something will work out. I'll find some place to sleep. I'm not worried about it.
Yeah.
When we go back even to, hundreds and certainly hundreds of years, thousands of years into colonization of humans, think about the exploration of North America.
True,
Your
yeah.
everyday person isn't going to get on a ship and go to a new land and never look back when you don't know anything about where you're going. But there's some people that go, sign me up. I want to do it,
Right.
And, we're attributing human characteristics here to deer. So that's not always going to be accurate, of course. But I just can't help but think that there's just something within the deer that, and it's kind of a risk reward. If you're a colonizer and go somewhere else and you do find better habitat, you do find more breeding opportunities, then, you're going to have more offspring and genetically you're the winner.
Yeah, I'd say a pretty good analogy, at least, as far as, again, understanding. And I think a lot of people, when you start digging into science, sometimes you just raise more questions than answers, and I think a lot of people try to look at science as like a definite thing, but it's a process, right?
You're exactly right. It's a process of elimination. And so many times, except for like with physics and things like that, or chemistry, but certainly in ecology and biology, we just eliminate some hypotheses. We may never know truly what the reason is, but we can test and eliminate some of them.
Yeah, because when you talk about things like physics, like you can nail down laws and stuff because you can easily replicate them. You can really isolate variables and things like that, and you can see them over and over again. But ecology and deer herds and stuff like that is a very changing thing, right?
We probably fail a good bit, but we always try to phrase a scientific response with deer as saying, here's what we see on the average. Here's what the average buck will do. And that's just because that's the proper way to frame it, because there's so much individual variation. You can't make a law or a rule and say they're all going to behave this way. You just say that on the average they do. Most of them do, but some of them don't behave this way.
Yeah, and as a hunter, I'm always trying to put the odds in my favor. So this is where you look at, okay, putting that to the test, it's always a gamble, but you're trying to minimize the risk of taking certain gambles when hunting. And the stats would tell me I should do this or that in a certain situation. Yeah, so mobile versus sedentary. Is it beneficial then for hunters to really try to figure out certain deer and what personality they then have? Okay, so here is your high IQ moment. Have you ever made what I call a buck profile? This is a detailed set of observations of a certain buck that will help you possibly take him. These can be a big key to establishing which bucks you'd like to take in an area, telltale quirks about him that may be helpful, but even more, which ones you can actually hunt and have a chance to kill. A common misconception many hunters have is that all bucks are killable, which is true, But I'll add something very important to the end of that, which makes all the difference, but not by you. The honest fact is, not all bucks are killable by you where you hunt due to their patterns and home ranges. Making a buck or killer profile is a good way to cut through the fog and make an honest assessment of if you can actually shoot a particular buck where you hunt. If he's just showing up on trail cams at night, you're probably wasting your precious time and season trying to chase him. Something to think about, and if you want to know more about making buck profiles, I'm linking an article I wrote about that below so you can check that out. Also, do you know your deer IQ? Do you think your deer's smart? Why don't you take our deer IQ test and find out? It's quick, fun, and easy to take, and you can share it with a buddy and compare your score to theirs. Dr. Strickland took it and will reveal his score next week. See if you can beat a doctor. It's linked below with a bunch of other very helpful stuff to check out, including our private Facebook page and group, our social links to actually connect with us there and talk with me, I'm on those, and our newsletter so you don't miss any of our weekly high IQ content. Sign up for those. And if you struggle to be consistent year after year on the best deer where you hunt, many of us do, check out our Deer IQ services to help you do just that. Okay, and now back to the podcast.
I would say yes, it would be beneficial if you can do it. And I think you would have to use a combination. You'd have to rely very heavily on your camera data. But if you can establish a pattern to where over your calendar year, and that's kind of how you would do it, is that we're seeing this particular buck at some frequency at this part of the property or on the property. And you did that for a number of years. If it starts repeating itself, then you would have what we would call one of these mobile bucks. It's just spending part of its time on your property. And it's pretty predictable of year in and year out of when they are going to move onto and off of your property.
Yeah, and I bet you a lot of guys can think in the past about different bucks they've had that have come and gone and they reappear and all this stuff. I start getting those patterns and really, looking at, I wonder how many guys waste time on a mobile buck and they don't realize it's a mobile buck.
Probably a good
probably
many,
a lot.
And probably this guy right here has done it too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we all have. So the sedentary buck, this might be too simplistic, but a sedentary buck would be a easier one, I would think, than to pattern and potentially get a crack at than a mobile one. And maybe, if I'm thinking about this, like, okay, if I can somehow categorize these, with data, and here's a list of shooters, I'd say, that I think are sedentary. Here's a list that are mobile. And you can start to really tactically look at where you hunt and the deer you hunt as to when you should go after certain ones. Is that something that, talking about application here, is that something that you've ever tried? Because we didn't mention this, but you're also a hunter, right? You're not just a deer researcher.
Yeah. You're
also a hunter. So as far as applying this then to, okay, how can I use this science to help me hunting when I have short seasons? If you think about it, it's a few months long, depending on what state you're in. What are some applications that, I can really get out of this as a hunter, or that you've maybe used to put this to work for you?
Well, I would say I think I'm a better researcher than a hunter. So I don't know if I have really successfully applied this stuff, but I do think about it a lot. And I do know that good hunters will apply this. I know for a fact there are some very well-known hunters that use their camera data and will categorize it by space and time of where on this particular location for this week or starting on this day, I will start seeing a particular buck. And you can't really act on that within the year for these mobile bucks. It needs to be documenting this behavior, assuming that it's going to live over deer season and winter and be alive the next year, and then anticipate and plan on where that camera location was at November 2nd. Starting October 27th, you need to start hunting that location.
Yeah.
The sedentary bucks, I would say you have a lot more flexibility, that any time during the year when the conditions are right, the wind is right, for example, the stand setup is right, that's from the beginning of deer season till the end of deer season, assuming the area that you're hunting completely encapsulates that buck's home range. So there's a caveat there with smaller properties. The
Right.
buck's home range could be 500 or 600 acres or 1,200 acres. And unless you have a big property, rarely do you completely capture the entire buck's home range. So got to think about that as well.
Yeah, that's some good stuff to think about for hunters to start, applying a little data, applying the science to my strategies in a limited time frame, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe with work and everything, there's really limited opportunities that people have for hunting, and you don't want to be hunting the wrong spot for the wrong buck or what have you, and really even getting down to the individual level. If you just want to shoot any deer, I think that's a little different story than specific bucks and with specific personalities. But
Yeah.
some really, really good, I think, helpful stuff to realize.
Yeah, you mentioned something there as well that I think's important, is that there's a continuum of hunting. There is, I just want to get in the woods and see deer and harvest a deer. That's one at the end of the continuum, and that is 100% fine. That's great. I'm probably on that end of the continuum with my work lifestyle. But I want to move towards more often is chasing a particular animal. That is really gratifying. That is a lot of fun. It's a puzzle you're trying to piece together, but
Right.
that's at the other end of the continuum of complexity and planning and research involved in that.
Yeah, and understanding what your goals are, right? Like, what are your goals, and taking tactics to get you toward your goals, right?
Right.
If I just want to shoot any animal for deer for the freezer, that's a totally different strategy, and I think amount of effort you need to put in versus talking very specific here. But, well, we're going to wrap up this segment here, and we're going to go into more specifics in the next segment. But Dr. Strickland, thank you for sharing all that.
Absolutely. Happy to, Adam.
In the next segment, we're going to look at, we have a deer IQ test that anybody can take. It's on our website, and we're going to look at the results. Dr. Strickland took it, and you can compare yours to that.
All right, and now for your high IQ takeaways and challenges. What can you do to up your game in the area of collecting data on deer where you hunt, so you can start making buck profiles and using data to help drive your hunting decisions? It's a whole process, but have you even started? Also, join our newsletter so you don't miss any of our new high IQ content shared weekly. And also like and subscribe here on YouTube or over on YouTube if you're just listening, so you can see our topics and videos as well over there. And next time we continue deer science with Dr. Bronson Strickland and talk about specific studies on collared bucks that reveal how hunting pressure, how this actually affects how deer use the landscape. Is it what we thought? Some really high IQ stuff in there. You won't want to miss it, and I'll see you then.